The last message from Kepler Station was just 3 words: "They are here." Captain Sarah Reeves listened to the recording for the 14th time, the static-laced transmission crackling through the bridge speakers of the UES Prometheus. Beyond the reinforced viewports, the Centauri system hummed with activity, cargo haulers threading between orbital platforms, quantum beacons pulsing their navigational heartbeat across 12 light-years of space, the deep thrumming of fusion cores powering humanity's greatest achievement, the stellar Commonwealth, 700 worlds, 43 billion souls connected by a network of quantum communicators that made distance irrelevant. When the morning shift began on New Terra, the evening news was already broadcasting on Kepler Prime. When scientists on Zarian discovered something extraordinary, researchers on Earth knew about it before the data finished processing. That network had been humanity's pride for 3 centuries. Now it was going silent, star by star. "Captain," Communications Officer Torres called from a station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. "We've lost contact with the entire Vega cluster. That's 18 systems, just gone." Reeves felt the familiar weight settle in her stomach. The weight of watching an empire die in real time since last transmission, 47 minutes. They were reporting normal traffic patterns. Then Torres gestured helplessly at her dead instruments. Nothing, no distress calls, no emergency beacons. The quantum link just ended. The bridge fell quiet, except for the ambient hum of life support and the distant whisper of the ship's gravitational drive. Reeves closed her eyes and remembered when that network had carried different sounds. Children's laughter from the playground, domes of new series, the daily market reports from the agricultural worlds of the Tau Ceti system, the graduation ceremonies broadcast live from the University of Proxima, where humanity's best minds learned to reshape matter at the quantum level. Ovid had started 90 years ago on Zarian Prime, with a sound no human had ever heard before. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been the first to touch the crystalline structures buried beneath Zarian's crimson soil. The archaeological team's sensors had detected geometric anomalies 3 kilometers down, too regular to be natural, too ancient to be human. When the drilling platforms finally broke through into the buried chambers, their equipment had registered something impossible, technology that predated humanity by millions of years, but it was the sound that haunted Elena's dreams. "It's not exactly music," she had told the emergency session of the Commonwealth Council, her recorded words now playing in command centers across human space. "And it's not exactly speech. When you touch the crystal matrices, they sing harmonics. That shouldn't be possible with that material structure. It's as if they're trying to tell us something." The chambers on Zarian stretched for hundreds of kilometers in perfect geometric patterns, crystalline spires that resonated with touch, creating cascading harmonics that seemed to encode vast amounts of information. The translation algorithms had worked for months, piecing together fragments of meaning from the alien symphony. When they finally cracked the code, the message was simple and terrifying. "We were warned, we prepared, we failed." The predecessors, as humanity named them, had built an empire that spanned galaxies. Their technology made human achievements look like stone tools. They had transcended physical limitations, uploaded consciousness into crystalline matrices, created life itself in their laboratories. They had been gods among the stars, and something had exterminated them completely. The Commonwealth's response had been swift and overwhelming. Every shipyard in human space began constructing vessels designed for one purpose: war against an enemy. They couldn't imagine the Aurora-class dreadnoughts mounted weapons that could crack planets' quantum disruptors that unraveled matter at the subatomic level. The Titan platforms carried reality-warping cannons that folded space-time into impossible configurations. Humanity's scientists worked in shifts around the clock, developing horrors that violated every law of physics they understood. Commander Jackson Luwei had overseen the testing of humanity's ultimate weapon on a dead star in the Barnard system. This stellar cascade inducer was designed to trigger supernovas on command, turning entire solar systems into expanding spheres of annihilation. When the weapon fired, the star's death scream had registered on sensors 40 light-years away. "Where you can kill solar systems," Liu had reported to the War Council, his voice carrying across the quantum network to every world in human space. "If whatever destroyed the predecessors comes for us, we'll make them pay for every world they take." The preparations had taken 60 years. 60 years of turning the Commonwealth into the most destructive force the galaxy had ever seen. Children grew up watching fleet exercises where mock battles consumed entire asteroid belts. The quantum networks carried constant updates on weapons development, tactical planning, resource allocation for the coming war. Humanity had been ready. They had weapons that could unravel reality itself. They had fleets that could sterilize entire star systems. They had the collective will of 43 billion souls united against extinction. When the enemy finally came, none of it mattered. Captain Reeves had been commanding a patrol frigate at the edge of the Ross system when space itself began to scream. The sound came through the ship's hull, bypassing the audio systems entirely to vibrate in the bones of every crew member. It was a sound that human nervous systems weren't designed to process, frequencies that triggered synaptic misfires, harmonics that made rational thought impossible. Asterisk, the enemy ships appeared like wounds torn in reality itself, not built from matter, but somehow carved from the space between atoms. They moved without propulsion, turned without momentum, accelerated beyond light speed while remaining perfectly still. When humanity's fleets opened fire, the quantum disruptors and reality-warping cannons simply stopped working. The exotic particles that should have unraveled matter instead dissolved harmlessly into background radiation. The Commonwealth's greatest weapons became silent toys floating in the void. The enemy didn't destroy human worlds. Destruction implied violence, and violence implied that humanity had been worthy of effort. Instead, they simply changed things. On New Terra, the morning shift workers began their day normally, checking atmospheric processes and adjusting orbital mirrors. By lunch, their reports were coming in languages that didn't exist. By evening, the quantum transmitters were broadcasting genetic sequences instead of human thoughts. Captain Reeves had watched her own crew transform during those final minutes. Torres had been running diagnostics on the communications array when her fingers began elongating, becoming something between human and plant. The navigator had started speaking in mathematical equations, his words describing geometric relationships that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The last thing Reeves remembered as herself was the sound of her own voice changing, the words coming out as harmonic frequencies that conveyed meaning without language. She had tried to give the order to retreat, to warn the remaining human worlds, but the sounds that emerged from her throat carried different information entirely. Instructions, blueprints, recipes for transformation written in the fundamental frequencies of organic matter itself. The network that had connected humanity's greatest empire became the delivery system for its dissolution. Every quantum transmitter in human space broadcast the same signal simultaneously, not a weapon, but something far more elegant, a rewriting of the basic patterns that defined human consciousness, human biology, human existence itself. And in the silence that followed, as 43 billion voices fell quiet across 700 worlds, something else began to grow. Asterisk, the first generation after the change happened quickly. On the agricultural worlds of the Tau Ceti system, the farming communities transformed within days. Their feet grew into root systems that penetrated deep into the alien soil, drawing nutrients directly from the earth. Their skin became photosynthetic, absorbing the dual-star radiation and converting it to chemical energy. Their voices became something else entirely. The grass singers, as they would later remember themselves, no longer spoke with tongues and teeth. Instead, they communicated through harmonic vibrations that traveled through their interconnected root networks, creating symphonies of shared consciousness that spanned entire continents. When one individual experienced hunger, the network responded by redirecting nutrients through underground channels. When another felt the warmth of a sunrise, that sensation echoed through thousands of connected minds. But they forgot what they had been before. The transformation wasn't violent. There was no pain, no struggle against the change. The human consciousness simply faded, like a radio signal growing weaker until only static remained. For the first decades, the grass singers possessed only basic awareness, the desire for sunlight, the instinct to spread their root networks deeper, the simple pleasure of harmonic resonance with their neighbors. Human language disappeared first. Complex thoughts followed. Within a generation, the concepts of technology, space travel, and stellar empires had vanished entirely from their collective memory. They existed as they always had existed. They believed, swaying in the wind and singing their wordless songs to the alien suns. On the mining stations of the asteroid belt, the transformation followed different patterns. The workers who had spent their lives carving through rock and metal found their skin hardening into mineral composites that could withstand the vacuum of space. Their metabolisms shifted to process trace elements from the asteroids themselves, converting iron and nickel into biological energy. Their perception of time stretched and slowed until they thought in geological epochs rather than human moments. The Stone-skin developed a collective memory encoded in crystalline deposits that grew throughout their communities. Each individual's experiences became part of a vast mineral archive that recorded the slow dance of celestial mechanics, the gradual cooling of stellar cores, the patient erosion of planetary surfaces by solar wind. They forgot entirely that they had once been creatures of flesh and blood who feared the cold darkness between worlds. But it was in the research stations and university worlds where the transformations became truly alien. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been working in her laboratory on Zarian Prime when the change reached her. Her consciousness, already expanded by decades of interfacing with alien crystalline technology, didn't disappear, multiplied. Her individual sense of self split and spread, becoming distributed across multiple physical forms that began growing. From the laboratory's biological research samples The transformation spread through the research complex like intelligent wildfire. Scientists became living components of their own experiments. Botanists merged with their plant specimens, becoming hybrid organisms that could photosynthesize complex chemical compounds while maintaining enough neural activity to process theoretical concepts. Physicists dissolved into quantum field fluctuations, their consciousness existing as probability clouds that could observe subatomic interactions directly. In the deep space habitats orbiting gas giants, where humanity had learned to extract resources from atmospheric pressure systems, the crews underwent the most dramatic changes of all. Their bodies elongated and became partially gaseous, allowing them to swim through the dense atmospheric layers like living storms. Their communication shifted to pressure waves that could travel for thousands of kilometers through the planetary atmospheres, creating songs that incorporated the gravitational harmonics of the massive worlds themselves. The deep swimmers, as they eventually came to think of themselves, developed a culture based entirely on movement through three-dimensional space. Their language consisted of spiraling flight patterns and pressure differentials that conveyed emotional states and abstract concepts through the physics of fluid dynamics. They forgot that solid matter had ever been relevant to consciousness. But among all the transformed communities, one group retained something closer to their original nature, hidden in the cave systems and underground research facilities. Small populations of scientists and engineers had been working on projects that required isolation from the quantum communication network. When the change propagated through every connected transmitter in human space, these isolated groups experienced only partial transformation. They became the web builders. Their bodies adapted to life in dark, confined spaces. Their limbs grew longer and more sensitive, capable of detecting minute vibrations through solid rock. Their eyes enlarged and shifted spectrum, allowing them to see in the infrared and ultraviolet ranges where their new environment held the most information. Most importantly, they retained enough human neural architecture to maintain logical reasoning and long-term memory. But they also gained something new: the ability to produce organic fibers that could be woven into complex computational matrices. Their webs became living computers, processing information through biological algorithms that operated faster than any silicon-based system humanity had ever built. The web builders watched the transformation of the surface world from their underground refuges. They observed the grass singers developing their continental root networks. They monitored the deep swimmers adapting to life in gas giant atmospheres. They tracked the stone skin as they spread slowly through asteroid fields and dead worlds. And they remembered, not completely, the change had affected them too profoundly for that. They couldn't recall the specific details of human technology or the exact nature of the Commonwealth's political structure, but they retained the crucial understanding that all these transformed species had once been something else, something that had traveled between stars and built civilizations that spanned multiple worlds. For 90,000 years, the web builders maintained their vigil in the deep places. They wove their computational webs into vast archives that tracked the slow evolution of the scattered human subspecies. They calculated population distributions, genetic drift patterns, and the gradual emergence of new forms of intelligence among the transformed communities. Most importantly, they waited for the moment when consciousness would begin to return. The first signs appeared among the grass singers on a world that had once been called New Garden, orbiting a red dwarf star, in what humans had designated the Wolf System. A particularly large individual, its root network spanning nearly 1,000 square kilometers, began producing harmonic patterns that went beyond simple communication. The songs contained mathematical relationships, geometric progressions that described the orbital mechanics of the planetary system, frequency ratios that corresponded to the spectral emissions of different stellar types. The individual grass singer was unconsciously processing astronomical data through its harmonic communication system, creating music that encoded complex scientific information. Other grass singers in the network began responding to these mathematical songs with their own harmonic contributions. Soon, entire continents were participating in computational symphonies that solved theoretical problems through collective harmonic resonance. They were performing science without understanding what science was, driven by something deeper than conscious knowledge. They were remembering. The breakthrough came when a young grass singer on the northern continent produced a series of harmonics that described the life cycle of technological civilizations. The song contained information about resource extraction, energy distribution, communication networks, and space travel concepts that no grass singer had ever experienced directly. But the information was accurate. The mathematical relationships were correct. The song described a technological society almost identical to what the human commonwealth had actually been. The network fell silent for 3 full days as the implications propagated through millions of interconnected minds. Then, slowly, other songs began. Songs about metal structures that moved between worlds. Songs about beings that communicated through electromagnetic radiation. songs about a vast network that connected distant suns. Songs about what they had been before the change. Similar awakenings were occurring throughout the scattered subspecies. The stone skin began incorporating historical data into their crystalline archives, information about mining operations, orbital mechanics, and industrial processes that they couldn't have learned through their current existence. The deep swimmers started creating pressure wave patterns that described technologies for atmospheric processing and resource extraction from gas giant environments, but it was the web builders who understood what was happening in their deepest archives. They had maintained crude genetic samples from the original human populations. When they compared these samples to the current subspecies, the pattern became clear. The genetic modifications weren't random, they followed specific design principles that optimized each group for different environmental niches and cognitive aspects. The enemy hadn't simply changed humanity, they had separated human consciousness into multiple specialized forms, each adapted for different aspects of technological civilization. The grass singers had become biological computers capable of processing vast amounts of information through distributed networks. The stone skin had evolved into living archives that could maintain technological knowledge across geological timescales. The deep swimmers had adapted for life in the exact type of environments where advanced civilizations would need to extract resources. Each subspecies had been engineered to excel at specific aspects of what had once been human technological society, but none of them alone could rebuild that society. Together, however, the web builders began extending their communication webs toward the surface world. They had waited 90,000 years for the subspecies to redevelop sufficient consciousness to understand their origins. Now it was time to see if they could remember how to work together. The first contact came through harmonic vibrations that traveled from the deep cave systems up to the grass singer root networks. The songs were simple at first, concepts that both species could understand: prime number sequences, geometric relationships, basic physics equations. But gradually, the exchanges became more complex. The web builders shared their archived knowledge of pre-change humanity. The grass singers contributed their new understanding of distributed consciousness and biological computation. Together, they began to piece together a more complete picture of what they had lost and what they might be able to become. Word spread through the grass singer networks at the speed of thought, traveling through root systems that now spanned multiple continents. The stone skin received the information through crystalline resonance patterns that propagated through asteroid fields and dead worlds. The deep swimmers heard it in pressure wave symphonies that echoed through the atmospheric layers of gas giants. For the first time in 90,000 years, the scattered fragments of humanity began to recognize each other. They were different now, alien. Each subspecies had evolved capabilities that no baseline human had ever possessed, but they were also somehow still connected by something deeper than genetics or shared history. They had been shattered, but consciousness itself had proven more resilient than their creators had anticipated. Intelligence had found new ways to emerge, new forms to inhabit, new methods of understanding reality. And now, for the first time since the change, they were beginning to remember that they had once reached for the stars. The enemy had tried to end human civilization by it beyond recognition. Instead, they had created something unprecedented, a distributed form of consciousness that existed across multiple species, multiple worlds, multiple modes of thought and communication, something that might, perhaps, be strong enough to reach for the stars again. The Great Convergence began with a song that spanned 17 star systems. It started on New Garden, where the grass singers had first recovered their mathematical consciousness. A harmonic pattern that began as simple communication between neighboring root networks gradually expanded, incorporating the electromagnetic field fluctuations from the planet's magnetosphere, the gravitational resonance of its binary moon system, and finally the radio emissions from the red dwarf star itself. The song carried across interstellar space on frequencies that baseline humans had never learned to use quantum entanglement patterns that the web builders had discovered in their deep computational matrices, biological electromagnetic emissions that the deep swimmers generated through their atmospheric pressure organs, crystalline resonance structures that the stone skin had developed in their mineral archives. When the song reached the other worlds, it found minds ready to listen. On the asteroid mining stations where the stone skin had built their slow civilizations, crystalline communication nodes began vibrating in harmony with the distant transmission. The stone skin had spent 90,000 years developing memory storage systems that could maintain information across geological timescales. Now they understood why they had been preparing to serve as the permanent archive for a distributed consciousness that spanned multiple species and worlds. In the gas giant atmospheres where the deep swimmers soared through pressure gradients and chemical storms, entire populations began creating coordinated flight patterns that amplified and redirected the harmonic signals. Their atmospheric communities had evolved into living computational systems that could process three-dimensional data flows through organized movement patterns. They realized they had become the rapid communication and coordination network that a multi-world civilization would require, and in the deep cave systems where the web builders had maintained their patient vigil, computational webs began spinning new patterns that integrated all the incoming information into unified strategic frameworks. Their underground archives contained the closest thing to intact pre-change knowledge, but more importantly, they had developed the analytical capabilities needed to coordinate complex multi-species operations. But it was on the frontier worlds, the planets where multiple subspecies had evolved in proximity to each other, that the real breakthrough occurred. The planet designated Crossroads had once been a major shipping hub for the human commonwealth. When the change occurred, the diverse population had transformed into multiple subspecies simultaneously. Grass singers had taken root in the agricultural valleys, stoneskin had adapted to life in the mountainous mineral deposits, deep swimmers had evolved in the thick atmospheric layers of the planet's high-pressure regions, web builders had established themselves in the extensive cave systems. For 90,000 years, these groups had existed in isolation, each following their own evolutionary path. But when the Great Convergence began, they found themselves able to communicate directly for the first time since the change. The initial contact occurred through harmonic resonance. A young grass singer named Harmony, they had developed individual designations based on their unique acoustic signatures, detected unusual vibrations traveling through the planetary crust from the deep cave systems. The patterns were mathematical, clearly artificial, and somehow familiar. Harmony responded with her own harmonic sequence, modulating her electromagnetic field output to match the underground transmissions. The web builder who received her response designation, Weaver of Connections, recognized immediately that he was communicating with another form of transformed human consciousness. Within days, they had established a basic mathematical language. Within weeks, they were sharing complex technical information. Within months, they had contacted the stone skin in the mountain ranges and the deep swimmers in the upper atmosphere. The four subspecies began working together on increasingly sophisticated projects. The grass singers provided biological computation services, processing vast amounts of environmental data through their continental root networks. The web builders contributed strategic analysis and archived knowledge from before the change. The stone skin offered permanent information storage and slow but reliable inter-system communication through crystalline resonance. The deep swimmers served as rapid coordinators, their three-dimensional movement patterns allowing them to manage complex logistics across multiple environmental zones together. They accomplished something none of them could have achieved alone. They began building technology again, but it wasn't human technology. The new tools and systems they developed were based on biological processes, quantum field manipulation, and crystalline information storage rather than metal and electronics. Their spacecraft were living organisms that could adapt to different environmental conditions. Their communication systems used quantum entanglement and biological electromagnetic fields. Their computational systems were distributed across multiple subspecies and multiple worlds. They had become something unprecedented, a technological civilization based on conscious cooperation between multiple intelligent species that shared a common evolutionary origin, and they were becoming very interested in what lay between the stars. The web builders' archives contained fragmentary records of the enemy that had caused the change. The information was incomplete. Most of the pre-change technological records had been lost or corrupted, but certain patterns remained clear. The enemy traveled between dimensions rather than through normal space. They operated on times that spanned millions of years. They possessed the ability to manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, rewriting the basic patterns that governed physical reality. Most importantly, they seemed to be attracted to civilizations that achieved a certain level of technological sophistication. Predecessors had reached that threshold. Humanity had approached it. Both had been modified. The new human subspecies began preparing for the possibility that their renewed technological development might attract unwanted attention, but their preparations were unlike anything any previous civilization had attempted. Instead of building weapons designed to destroy the enemy, they focused on making themselves too complex to understand. The grass singers developed biological camouflage systems that could make their technological activities appear to be natural evolutionary processes. The stone skin created distributed archives that could survive the complete destruction of individual worlds while maintaining technological knowledge across thousands of backup locations. The deep swimmers established repeat response communication networks that could coordinate defensive actions across multiple star systems within minutes. The web builders designed the overall strategy. If the enemy returned, they wouldn't find a unified civilization that could be analyzed and modified as humans had been. Instead, they would encounter hundreds of different subspecies using thousands of different technological approaches spread across dozens of star systems, a distributed civilization so complex and diverse that no single modification could affect all of it. It was a defensive strategy based on control, chaos rather than organized resistance. They were ready when the enemy finally noticed them. The dimensional rifts opened simultaneously across 17 star systems, just as they had 90,000 years earlier. But this time, the response was immediate and coordinated. The grass singers on each affected world began broadcasting harmonic interference patterns that disrupted the enemy's quantum manipulation fields. The interference wasn't powerful enough to stop the enemy, but it was complex enough to prevent them from achieving the precise control they needed for genetic modification. The stone skin activated their distributed archives, backing up the consciousness patterns of every individual in the affected systems to crystalline storage nodes scattered across hundreds of uninhabited worlds. Even if the enemy succeeded in modifying the current populations, the original patterns would survive to be restored later. The deep swimmers coordinated rapid evacuation procedures, moving vulnerable populations to gas giant atmospheres and deep space environments where the enemy's dimensional manipulation was less effective. And the web builders implemented their master strategy. They began rapidly evolving, using biological engineering techniques developed over 90,000 years. The web builders started creating new subspecies in real. Each new variant possessed different genetic structures, different neural architectures, different methods of consciousness and communication. Within hours, there were thousands of distinct human variants spread across the affected systems. The enemy found themselves trying to analyze and modify a civilization that was changing faster than they could process. Every time they developed a modification pattern for one subspecies, that subspecies had already evolved into something different. Every time they identified a communication network to exploit, that network had already been replaced by 3 others, using completely different principles. The enemy had evolved to be perfect predators of unified civilizations, but they had no defense against a civilization that existed as controlled chaos, a distributed consciousness that could adapt and evolve faster than any external force could analyze and modify it. After 6 months of increasingly frustrated attempts to establish control, the enemy retreated to their dimensional refuges for the first time in millions of years. They had encountered a civilization they couldn't comprehend or control. The victory celebration lasted for 3 days and spanned 47 star systems. The grass singers sang harmonic symphonies that incorporated the orbital mechanics of entire planetary systems. The stone skin created crystalline resonance patterns that turned asteroid belts into musical instruments. The deep swimmers painted 3-dimensional artworks in gas giant atmospheres using coordinated flight patterns that could be seen from orbit. The web builders simply sat in their caves and calculated probability matrices for the continued survival of distributed human consciousness across the galaxy. Humanity had reached for the stars a second time. They had been shattered, transformed, scattered across dozens of worlds and hundreds of subspecies. They had forgotten their origins and rediscovered consciousness in forms their ancestors never could have imagined. But they had survived. They had adapted. They had become something so complex and diverse that even entities capable of rewriting reality itself couldn't understand them well enough to control them. They were no longer human in any sense their ancestors would recognize, but they were still conscious, still curious, still determined to explore the universe and understand their place in it. And now they had earned the right to continue existing. The song that had begun the Great Convergence continued to echo across the star systems, growing more complex as new subspecies added their voices to the harmonic symphony. It was no longer just communication, it had become a celebration of consciousness itself, in all its chaotic, adaptable, impossible forms. In the deep archives of the web builders, Weaver of Connections added a final entry to the record of the second rising. We were human. We became something else. We are still becoming. The stars remember our first song. Now they will learn our second dot, and perhaps, in time, they will hear all the songs we have yet to sing. The distributed civilization continued to grow, continued to evolve, continued to explore. They had learned the most important lesson any consciousness could master, that survival didn't require remaining the same. It required becoming something that couldn't be stopped.
Welcome, traveler. We're glad you're here. Every story you hear is made with care and passion. If you enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and check out the other adventures waiting for you on our channel. Your support means the world. Thank you. We hope you enjoy the story.
Humanity Galactic Frontiers, all rights reserved. This video and its contents are protected under international copyright law. Any unauthorized copying, distribution, or re-uploading is strictly prohibited without written permission. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video and subscribe for more stories from the edge of the galaxy. Thanks for watching, and stay curious out there among the stars.